Hey everyone, welcome back to the Growing Together podcast with me, Sunny Vasquez.
And me, Cesar Santos.
A podcast where we talk about everything under the sun related to growth and becoming the best version of yourself, whether that's growing professionally or growing personally, maybe spiritually, all of the things under the sun. It's pretty much what we're about here. Before we get into today's episode, how are you feeling this morning, Cesar?
Pretty good, actually. You know, it's a Saturday. I always start
feel
off.
like that's this is always Cesar. I asked him, how are you feeling? Cesar goes, pretty good, actually.
Well, I mean, it's pretty good. You know, like I ended up getting another video out this week, which I felt accomplished. Got some projects done too as well. I still have other work to do, but it's been good. You know, I felt like I've learned a lot. I've learned more about what I'm doing as an editor, and I feel like we're learning more and more about this podcast too. You know, like what's resonating with people on the internet, you know, through reels and shorts. So it's been good, you know. We're still testing and tuning, you know. I feel like it's like a car, you know. This podcast is like a car, so we're like, you know, doing stuff.
Yeah. So descriptive you are.
Doing, you know, like I was. What do you mean? I was pretty descriptive.
But other than work related stuff, how are you?
I mean, I think I'm okay. You know, I feel like we're continuing on this path of like trying to figure things out and whatnot. So yeah. What about you? How are you? You always ask me, how are you, Cesar? Now, what about you?
I'm tired.
You're tired.
I'm so tired. I literally didn't want to get out of bed this morning. I have so much to do that it's stressing me out. Yeah, so that's how it feels. I have laundry to do. I feel like when you work, well, most people work full time, but like some people argue for 4-day work weeks because they say that, okay, I need one day to do absolutely nothing and then one day to do all the that I actually need to do, like around the house, like chores, like all that kind of stuff, and then another day to have like fun activities. So like I feel like, yeah, like with the 2-day weekend, like you're kind of trying to separate your time, and obviously we record this podcast and I love recording the podcast and I want to continue doing it. So it's obviously carving out time to do this, but then I also have like a bunch of laundry and other like personal projects you want to work on, and I'm the type of person that always feels like I need to be productive. So whenever I try to rest, I'm like, you piece of shit, Sunny, why aren't you?
I mean, you're always trying to do stuff.
Why aren't you doing something?
Yeah.
But I'm trying to change that mindset because it's good to rest. It's good to get your rest. But with that being said, I feel like what I just talked about kind of relates to today's episode. Today's episode is I feel like this is like probably one of the trending topics that are going to talk about. But it's trending hard right now, and it's called quiet quitting. So Cesar and I were talking a little bit about this last night. I asked him if he knew what it was, and he wasn't super familiar with it. But when you hear the term quiet quitting, what do you think of?
I'm gonna tell you exactly what I thought of when I first came across it. I literally thought someone's just like being very quiet about their intentions of leaving a job. So I thought like maybe they have
literally quietly quitting.
Well, like no, yeah, it's literally that's not like. Wait, is it like basically someone just they're at this job or in their career or whatever the case is, but like they're already looking at other avenues. Maybe they have a new they have a new job opportunity, so they're at this job they're at now. They're gonna quietly just not work or like not tell their employer that they got a new job. That's what I thought it was. But then once I read into it, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense too.
Yeah. So if you don't. No, quiet quitting is basically like when you're not I think this is why people hate that it's called quiet quitting. I kind of do hate that it's called quitting too, because you're not quitting at all. In a sense, is quiet quitting is when you're at a job and you're no longer going above and beyond in that job. Like if you were giving 300%, you're now only giving that original 100% that is your job description. You're not doing any more, any less. You're doing your job, so you're doing what you're getting paid to do. But the reason, this is what I think, I'm not entirely sure this is why it's called quiet quitting, that I'm pretty sure, I don't know who coined that term, whether it was an employer or an employee, but it's because the norm is like hustle culture. The norm is you kind of kill yourself for your job. You do whatever it takes to get that promotion, and sometimes that's not always rewarded. And I think when you go into certain companies or dynamics where you're just there to do your job, it's not seen as like a team player, you know?
Yeah, and I mean,
It's like seen as like, oh, this person isn't a team player. They're not, or like when you go from giving the 300% to only giving the 100, they're like, what changed? It's like, well, I'm doing what I originally was hired to do.
yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because when I used to work at the bank, towards like my end of my employment
quick.
there. Well, no, I mean it's funny because the thing is, I used to work at a bank. I'm not gonna say which one, but it was like where we had to do sales like as a teller or whatever the case is, and I would do my best to like try to get people over to the other people that work there to close these sales or whatever the case is. But towards the end of it, like I was really passionate about like this business that we were doing, that I just kind of felt like, I'm just gonna do the bare minimum of what I need to do to stay here. But then like my manager at the time noticed that and like pulled me, like after a week or two of that, he pulled me to the side and it's like, hey, what's going on? Like it's it's like, well, and then I let him know the honest truth, like, hey, I have passions outside of this workplace that I'm more passionate about. I mean, I'm still doing my job here. But he's like, well, just let me know when you're thinking about leaving. And obviously I wasn't just gonna like just leave that same day and be like deuces. Like I was gonna be a person to at least give my 2 weeks in, and that's what I did. But they notice, especially when you're like if you're very like if you're always giving 300%, and then there's one day where you only give 100, and it's like, oh, what's going on with what's going on with Jim today?
Or a series of days. I think like one day they might think, oh, it's a one-off, but if it starts to become routine, I think that's when like employers start to question it. But it's funny because it's like they'll ask the question, what's up? What's wrong? Like, why aren't you doing all of these things, versus like looking within like the company and saying like, should we be paying this person more, like what they're worth and what they're offering?
Yeah.
I think that's, from an employee perspective, that's what frustrates some people who were originally going above and beyond and doing everything they could for the company they could work for, is that they were taking on a lot of things that were outside their job description, or taking on these projects and more work because they did care about the work they did, but it wasn't being recognized or rewarded. You weren't being compensated for that. So after a certain period of time of that happening, you're like, what is this all for? So I can understand it from like an employee perspective too, because I think for the most part, we all want to know that like we do a good job, that our work is valued, our contributions are valued, and most importantly, that we're compensated for what we're doing. So if you don't feel those things, it can start to be really frustrating. So you think to yourself, why would I do more than what I'm supposed to? I think it also comes down to the work environment you're in. I just think the work environment plays a lot into it. Like if your work environment already isn't great, and you also aren't seeing this recognition or being compensated for what you're doing, you're not really inclined to give that extra 200%. But it was funny because I was reading about it yesterday, and this I think it was The Atlantic. I just like wrote it down here.
Are they the ones that write all those types of subjects? So it doesn't surprise me. It's The Atlantic.
But I'm not sure entirely, but it was like a quote. It says, what people are now calling quiet quitting was in a previous decade simply known as having a job. So like, it's not quitting. It's like you just go to your job and you go home. And I think we talked about this too last night a little bit, is that we tie so much worth to what we do for work.
We talked about this before, where you've said, like, if you ever go to someone who you've never met and you're introducing yourself,
you say, what do you do?
What do you do?
And you're not thinking, what do you do? Like, what's your passion project? You're thinking like, what do you do for work? And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but, and I think the world is changing in that aspect, like now, but for the longest time, it was like everything, not who you are is what your job, but like that's what people want to know about you. I mean, that's the essence of LinkedIn. Like when you go on LinkedIn, you're looking at what previous positions someone held, like their career history. That's what matters essentially. Like, you're not looking, which obviously it's a professional platform to connect and network, but no one's asking like, what do you do for fun? Like they're asking, what do you do for work? Your job means so much essentially. And I think now people are realizing that there needs to be an emphasis on who you are outside of your job.
I mean, man,
Who are you outside of your work, Caesar? That's a good question.
that's a really good question, actually. I mean, I think of myself as a, obviously I'm a son. Also a sibling, and I am. I guess I'm your fiance. So I think.
But
of
that's
those
all
things,
in relation to
but
someone else.
that's
Like
true.
you're a son because your
you're
mom
someone
birthed you.
birthed
You're a
you.
brother because you have siblings. You're a fiance because you got me. So like outside of those things, the connections you have to people, who are you?
What about like? See, what
Caesar's
about
like, I don't know how to answer
no?
this
I mean, like, what
question.
about like a content creator? I mean,
No,
that
like, that's
also
what I'm
has
saying.
to do with your
I mean, that's kind of how
what I do
but
too. But
yeah, that has to do with what you do. As like,
yeah, I mean, I guess I would say like. I think if I think about it really hard enough, like everything that I do, it has to do with creating some sort of form of art, whether it's visually, it's a visual form of art. Like
he's an artist.
so, I would say like, I'm an artist. I'm not like a philosophical person online or talking about all these things. There are some people that do a great job at it, whether it's they're what do you call it, commentators or whatever the case is. So like I'm not in that realm, but I have friends that are in that realm and are content creators. But yeah, I would say like I'm a form of like an artist, visually creating these cool visuals for people, either for myself, whether it's like a really cool edit, but I also do it for myself and others too as well. So, or in other forms too. I used to love drawing as a kid. Remember that picture I showed you?
I think that's the whole
Yeah.
thing, though, is that like you love creating,
Yeah.
and you've just applied that to obviously what you do
Yeah.
for work and how you help other people do so. So I think you've tied. I think also this goes back to like conversations you had about tying your passions to actually what you do for work, which is
Yeah.
why like if you are passionate about your work, and you are, if that's aligned with like who you are as a person, maybe it's not so bad to put like so much emphasis on what you do for a job because you're very proud of it, but yeah, I was reading basically, quiet quitting isn't about quitting. It's just about, reevaluating what matters to you and I think your value to a company. And I think a lot of people have a different opinion on it. A lot of I think employers see it a different way than like employees see it. I think some employers might look at themselves like maybe we are the problem. And that's a good place to start is like, okay, if you're an employer, there's an issue in your office. People are what that you call quiet quitting. I think the first step of action should be like, what can we do about it? Why is this happening? To look inward and think to yourself, are we recognizing our employees enough? Are our employees fairly compensated, not just based on like inflation, but based on the performance and work that they provide? Just re-looking at your company values. I think that's the conversation that's not really being had around this quiet quitting is like, oh, man, these people, they're not giving us their all anymore. Why is that? It's like, no, think about it. Why is that? Why don't they want to do that anymore? Especially if they once were.
Yeah.
I had a conversation. We really need a jar here that has like to put nickels in, because I had a conversation when I was at Target, and this conversation broke my heart, like shattered it into two. Basically, I had a conversation with a higher up who, when I first had gotten to that specific store, I was young, I was hungry, I was happy, and I really wanted to just make this change. And as the time went on, I still worked very hard, but it was physically exhausting, mentally exhausting, and you felt like nothing you did was going to please people. And so that kind of really weighs down on you. And this leader said to me, what happened to like, the sunny person, like the bubbly personality, like this, like what happened to you? And I'm like, you're asking me this, but why don't you think about it? Why don't you think about why maybe I'm not that person anymore? What could have caused that. And it was really that everyone always complained versus recognizing like what I was doing right, you know? It was like always, oh, well, you didn't do this. It's like, yeah, but I did this, this, and this. And like maybe that one thing didn't get done, but these things got done. And you know, I had to always shift my priorities and match other priorities. So that was like a heartbreaking conversation. I felt like it wasn't about me reevaluating myself. It was about that leader thinking, what could I be doing to support, you know? Like, not, oh, you just need to work harder and figure it out kind of thing. And I think it's really I think sometimes it's a one-sided thing. You know, there's two sides of this argument. Like, there's employees and employers, but like, I think it's really on employers to uncover, is there something that's going on in the work environment that they're not realizing?
I mean, most of the time it probably is. I know from my own experiences too as well. It was something going on within the environment itself, whether it's like the culture wasn't well established, like, and, some companies will have these, talking about values, like they'll have values, like, 1 through 10 or whatever the values are, tenets or whatever the case is, and a lot of them don't. Not to say they don't make sense, but a lot of them weren't even being lived by.
Yeah, they're just like
so they're just kind of like those motivational posters you get. It reminds me of those, and there are some companies that do, like, they do have their employees, their team, like, that live by these, by these standards, and like seeing some of the opportunities that I've like looked online, and a lot of like these places that are like, whether they're hiring video editors or production people, like they like specify like in the job description how like they want you to like live by a certain thing or whatever the case is. Like, are you a person of XYZ? It's mostly the financial stuff, but financial industry where they're like, are you XYZ? I'm like, well, I can see myself as that, but
I think though too, it's like, it's one thing to see that in like a job description, but I heard somewhere too, like when you're interviewing for a company, they're not just interviewing you, but you're interviewing them too, because you're wanting to see if this is a right fit for you. Sometimes it really isn't just the right fit, not the kind of environment that you're going to thrive in, and it's not one that the company's gonna like, it's not going to be successful on the company side either. So you're always looking for that fit. And when it comes to having a great culture, that also, we talked about this with Mike, that also comes down to the people you bring on, and that process has to be airtight. It has to be not just seamless, but well thought out and purposeful. And that, sometimes that's also the problem, is like, who are we hiring? When you have like one person that isn't right for your team, sometimes that can impact the entire team, and that can destroy morale. It's bad. So,
I've seen it. So,
but like going back to like, the company values, it's like a good question if you were interviewing for a company is like, oh, I saw that X, Y, and Z were your values. Can you tell me how that applies to everyone's position? Can you tell me how you guys are living out those values day to day within the company? Because it's easy to put these values in a job description or on your company website or whatever, but it's really harder to kind of show that you're living out these values. I think there was a story, I'm not sure what company it was. It was one of those, I don't know. But basically one of those like companies that end up like downfalling for like, I don't know, fraudulent stuff, had like integrity as one of their company values.
Oh, I do.
And it's
okay.
It's like, how ironic is that? Like, integrity is so important to you, but there wasn't integrity.
There's a lack of integrity in the
there was a lack of integrity in the environment. So it's kind of like, it's just ironic and funny to see that, because clearly that wasn't a value. Clearly that was just something that you're pinpointing. So when people walk in, they think something. Yeah. They think something of your business. But I know that when we talk about quiet quitting, like I said, a lot of people have different opinions. I think it comes down to generation too. I remember and I talked about this previously on a couple of different podcasts, about my mom saying that, a lot of people don't want to work, and I'm pretty sure like my dad feels that way too. Then I asked Noah too about like quiet quitting.
My brother, yeah.
I asked him about quiet quitting, what he thought. He was like, honestly, they just don't have anything else to talk about. That's
Well,
why.
the
That's
news,
why.
like the news
That's
cycle.
why this is getting brought
can
up,
see that
because they
too.
don't have anything
Yeah.
else to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think it's just when we deviate from the norm of like what the norm is for society, people just, it's like an uproar, because this wasn't normal. Hustle culture got so instilled in us that when you don't, everyday hustle, it's seen as like that person is just lazy, or that person just doesn't want to work. It's like, no, I want balance, my man. Like, I need balance in my life. And I think that's important. I honestly think, like, I don't know, life is all about balance. And so work-life balance and just, figuring out what matters to you. And unfortunately for companies, it doesn't benefit them to have people who don't want to do all the work and not be compensated for it.
I mean, the other thing too is like, I know there's some positions and jobs that you've also, like, before you got hired on with the position that you work now, where I guess, like, your job description was kind of like not clear, or maybe it was
Yeah, there
clear,
was no role clarity.
And then, role clarity. But then also it's like, since like in most startups, like there's a constant shift of like things going on, or people need, we need someone to do this now. So like, you're hired on to do this. Can you do this? And then like you're taking on more than what your role was when you got hired on, or whatever the case was.
I think that also goes down
like,
to the environment, though, because, for instance, like where I worked before Composely, there was lack of role clarity. Like, the expectations were unrealistic and also weren't super clear either. With where I work now at a startup, at Composely, I was hired to do something. I was hired to do what I'm doing now, but my role has evolved as the company's evolved. Mm-hmm. And that was never, like, it was never evolving without me being updated on how things were changing. I was given constant role clarity of like how certain changes we were making were gonna affect my job. And I think that makes all of the difference, is the constant communication about what part I play. As long as I know what part I'm playing in this, I think that makes it 100% easier. If you don't even know what part you're supposed to play, that makes your job 100% harder. It's like, what is my value here? I always know every day at work what value I'm bringing, what my role is, and I have that role clarity, and I think that makes all the difference, despite the fact that my role is changing. It's changing in a way that, for one, that I enjoy, and that I know is going to benefit, like, what I'm doing. And luckily, I'm passionate. Again, like I talk about all the time, I'm passionate about what I'm doing. I'm passionate what I'm doing. I'm passionate about what I'm doing, and I love the company I work for, and I respect how they've gone about things. And I think because I have that foundation with the company I work for, it's a lot different than some of these experience I know other people are having. Is like they're having these experience and they also didn't have a solid foundation to begin with. Mm-hmm. And I think the foundation and the relationship you build with people within a company matters. I'm huge into relationship building, and at the end of the day, I know like we're a business, but I feel like the relationships I created with people within the company have helped me feel confident in the work I do, but also feel confident in the work that other people are doing that affects me.
Yeah, and then also the other thing too as well, especially when it comes to relationships, is if there isn't something that's tying you to the company, where you're enjoying it, whether it's the relationships you're establishing at this company, or even like, it doesn't even have to do with business or like an employer. That can also do with like a group of people that you hang out with. If you're a person, right, like you're motivated, you want to continue to create things, and the group of people that you're hanging around with aren't thinking that same way that you do, and they're actually bringing you down, it wouldn't make sense for you to be like, you know what, like I'm gonna go and find another circle of people that will continue to help me up. The same way with the job, like if you're at an employer and you're not, you're there, you're working hard, what they're doing maybe it's not right, or whatever the case is, you'd quietly quit and leave. Same with like.
But it's not. That's not quite quitting.
What? No. I mean, all I'm just saying is that you would. If I'm trying to bring this full circle with what we're talking about in this podcast, which is quiet quitting. But if you're working somewhere and you were giving 300% into that job, the same way that let's say you gave 300% into a relationship of friends, and they didn't notice you at all. You're like, what am I doing here? You would probably quietly leave that friendship. I don't know. Maybe some people would stay. But I'm trying to talk about the employer side of things here, where you would quietly quit if you gave 300%. You would just give 100. You would still work there. Maybe some people would be like, you know what? I want to give 300% somewhere else where I'm being recognized and also being compensated too. So then you start looking for jobs, and maybe you just actually quit. You actually leave versus just, just giving it 100.
I also think so. I'm gonna also play like devil's advocate here. On the employer side, I think there are some conversations that employees could be having with their employers if they're feeling some type of way. Communication is so important, and I know it can be uncomfortable too, especially if like you're thinking you should be compensated more if you're not feeling great, and if there's not trust. Again, if you don't have great relationships and you don't feel comfortable talking to that upper management, it can be 100 times more difficult. But at the same time, we should be having those conversations with the people at those companies, because that's the only way those companies are going to grow and become better too. And like what they do with that information is ultimately on them. But if like I've resorted down every avenue, especially if you like your job and you like the company you work for, you should have those conversations. And if you don't see change, maybe it is time to just, turn a new leaf and look for something new, or, just give that 100. And, again, sometimes a job is a means to an end and nothing more. It completely depends on the type of person you are. I don't shame people, that just give 100%, because again, you are doing what you have to do. You're providing for yourself, and at the same time, your job doesn't have to be your life. It's not lazy. It's, doing what you're paid to do. And I think some people see it as laziness, but I just don't. I think it's, we're all different people. We all want different things out of our job and out of our life. So to like look at a company and think that everyone has the same purpose within the company is a little like naive. For instance, like I tie a lot of worth, which shouldn't. I tie a lot of like who I am as a person to what I do for work, because I'm passionate about what I do. But I don't know that like everyone I work for, I'm sure everyone I work for is passionate about what they do, but I'm sure that they're probably passionate about a lot of other things, and they might see the job we do as a lot different. So, and that's okay, because they're different people, and I'm, the expectation isn't that everyone like 100% this has to be their life, So
Yeah, I mean, most people probably, I would, make, not argue to say, but I would probably say most people do have other passions outside of their workplace, most of the
as
time.
you should.
Yeah,
like
as you should, yeah.
I think that's when it comes to finding joy in your life too, you need to find other passions, because unfortunate as this, job can get taken away. Not that there won't be other opportunities, but a job can get taken away, or it can, you don't know what's gonna happen. So you do have to find sources of passion in other things. And I think that's what I'm learning too, is to find other things that I love, because that's gonna like even out my happiness. Because like if I have a bad day at work, it's like, okay, what else can I turn to? Although I love what I do, there's gonna be bad days. And so I'm like, okay, well, I find happiness in like spending time reading, or I find happiness in doing this podcast, or figuring out like the Instagram algorithm and other things. So yeah, it's important to have that kind of, I think, passion outside of work. But again, to the other thing, it's not bad if you don't. Like, I think some people, I have friends, I'm not going to mention who they are, but I love this person, who is like, I literally have no hobbies. She's like, I don't have any hobbies. Like, I just like, and that's okay. Everyone is so different. And I think it's like, it goes back to judgment. Like, we judge so many different things for so many different reasons, and I don't understand it. I think quiet quitting is just another one of those things that, like, we're now talking about. And then I'm on LinkedIn all the time, and I saw a bunch of conversations about it, too. And, like, there's this girl on TikTok. I don't know her username, but she's so funny. And her whole page is basically, like, you have like this leader, she does these skits, and she's like, you have this leader who's like, has unrealistic expectations, wants people to work over like, over like their scheduled hours, and this girl goes around the office like, hey, act your wage. Act your wage.
Act your wage.
And she was like, Veronica, can you stop telling people to act your wage? It's affecting our performance. And she was like, so you want people to do work that they're not getting paid for? And it's so freaking funny because it does shed to light like an actual issue, is that like some companies have that mindset of like, I just need 100 people that are just willing to like absolutely kill themselves for the job and not want to be compensated for it. And I honestly, I'm not going to lie, I had that, especially because I'm like, fairly young. I had that mindset for a long time that I should just be grateful to have a job, and I need to give my absolute all and not expect compensation. Like, not expect to be compensated because this is just what you're supposed to do.
For the longest time, I think more now, I would say because of the internet, people are like realizing how there's other opportunities outside of what they believed to be like a thing, like, oh, I have to go to college and do this and XYZ, but people are learning other ways and means of creating wealth for themselves or their families, right? So I think because of that, more people are like, man, like either whether they obviously they don't leave when you quit, they're just still working there. But some people might take the opportunity to be like, I'm going to go and do this other thing, bounce.
Or they look for something that's going to be more desirable to the life that they want.
Or side hustles,
Yeah, like or side hustles. Yeah. And Gary Vee actually just posted something about this, about quiet quitting. Someone asked him, like, what do you think about quiet quitting? He goes, I honestly don't think that's what we should be talking about. She goes, the fact of the matter is that people have so many options nowadays that you aren't going to like make money, that you aren't going to be able to find an employee for less than $100,000 because you can make close to that doing other things. And so I mean, I gotta figure out like what people.
In New York, in New York, it's different, right? $100,000, the salary a year. It's like
But I don't think he was talking about specifically New York. He was talking about like just the fact that people are figuring out how to make like 6 figures in easier ways and more efficient ways, and like things where they're not having to spend like 50-60 hours a week at a job.
Amazon FBA, all these things,
So people are just getting creative and finding ways that they make money, and so which also makes it harder for employers. But I also think it just goes back to compensation. Compensation is important, and if I had to relate it back to something, I used to see a lot of people reach out to, like, for instance, hairstylists, people who make cakes or do these things as, like, side hustles. Can I get, like, a cake, for instance? Like, but they don't want to pay.
Oh, they ask for
they're like, it'd be great exposure. And it's like, well, exposure doesn't pay my bill. And I think that is the same thing as, like, in a work environment. Sometimes you'll say there's so much room for growth. Like, this is a great opportunity, a great learning experience, and like
it's good for your resume.
Yeah, good for your resume. We can't pay you what you're for the work you're actually gonna be doing. So like obviously you'll be getting salary, but it's probably maybe not ideal. But like all these other benefits. But at the end of the day, people are money driven, and not in a bad way. But we have bills, we have things that have to get covered. So it's important that you're compensated for the work that you do. Bless you.
Sorry, thank you.
But yeah, so I think a lot of it comes down to compensation for some people. Although I know some people, the reason that they're not like, it's a mixture of like compensation, culture, management. That's the other thing is that management I think comes into play too.
Oh, no,
if you have crappy management, oh man,
Yeah, no, if you, we've both gone, whether it's different companies we worked for, we both like have worked with people that were just like, you could see the issues going on, you can see the issues at hand, and the things are being ignored, and you're like, well, this is going to be a disaster, and then it turns into a disaster. But management's a big deal when it comes to working with any employer or if maybe you're a business owner, like that's definitely something to be looking at.
Yeah, because I mean, they set the tone for like, especially because management is someone that you should feel comfortable going to when you have issues and all that kind of stuff. So if you don't have great management, if you don't have great relationship with the management, if they don't like, you know, treat you respectfully, like you're not going to feel super great, super valued. I think it's so important. I feel like if I would have come into Composely into a different environment where the management wasn't good or all that kind of stuff, I would have, not wanted to stay there. I also wouldn't have had the same experience that I have now. And a lot of it, when I pick it apart a lot. I pick apart like what I like about what's going on in my life and what I like about my job, and it really has to do with that. Relationships are so important to me, so that's something that I try to build within like anywhere that I go. Knowing my value, and people knowing my value, although again I need to stop like needing external validation. The fact that I know, for instance, like when we've onboarded a couple employees and I've had like one-on-one meetings with them, be like, oh, I've heard so much about you. I've heard so many great things. And I'm like, that is something that makes my heart like flutter, because it's like, oh, like this person knows that like already knows the role that I play in the company, which is a little like, I probably shouldn't like just be so happy about that. But
I mean, it's good. It makes you feel good.
It makes me feel good. Like it makes me know that like, oh, like I come in knowing like Sunny's a badass, and like people are saying these good things, and that it just shows that my company values me. Is kind of the point I was trying to make. So that always felt good, and that matters to me, and it matters like even though I'm the type of person that can hear it a million times and still not believe it. It's nice to know that I'm valued and the part I play in this whole environment. And I also take pride in creating a great environment for other people too. Like I'm not in management, but when we onboard another person, I try to make them feel how I want to feel when I was onboarded, which luckily I was onboarded into a great like atmosphere. But I'm always talking to them, letting them know if they need anything, let me know, like just to have conversations, because that's so important, especially when you're building a foundation, is having people that you can confide in and maybe talk to about issues you're having or struggles you're having. It's so important. So when you don't have that at a company too, I think it's just not, you don't feel great. Who do you turn to when there is an issue?
In this case, you wouldn't have anyone to turn it to if you didn't if there wasn't some kind of if there wasn't someone there that you either trusted or that management wasn't there, like that should be there to help you find solutions to the problems that you're having.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem.
Yeah.
I was thinking of something talking about quiet quitting earlier, and I completely blanked out, but it had to do with obviously the different job opportunities that are available nowadays. We talked a little bit about like the side hustles and whatnot. But the other thing too is I feel that, because we were talking about generationally, my parents, your parents, or my grandparents, obviously. I feel like for them, quiet quitting, depending on obviously what industry they're working in, whether let's say it was agriculture, like you don't quiet quit in agriculture because you have to provide for your family. Like if you don't put at least 100% or more into like feeding your family, in this case like you had a farm, that's not good.
But even go back to like my parents like generation, right? Like I mean, my dad is like a manager. I think their generation wasn't like what I said earlier, was like that was just having a job. Was just like it was a job. It wasn't anything else besides a job. It wasn't your whole life. And then somewhere along the lines we blurred these lines of what a job is for some people, and I think that's obviously where quiet quitting comes from.
The reason I brought up agriculture a second ago is because my dad has some farms, like farmland. And he has a very, very hard time finding people similar to what your dad says, like, obviously like logistics, but he has a hard time finding people to work on the farm. It's always older people, like older generations his age, that would like work on it. And he has trouble finding younger people. I think mainly to do, obviously, because there's other opportunities where they don't have to, wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and do all these farm life stuff, but where they can just, go to an office or whatever the case is. But I do definitely people who work on farms for a living to provide for themselves or for their people that where they live. It's a difficult thing to do, but I can see why people like doing it. But yeah, you can't quite quit doing like being a farmer. There's no, or else your land's gonna dry up. But yeah,
and it's also like if, for instance, if you're like if we go back to compensation, if you're only being paid like your salary and you're going above and beyond and nothing's changing, it's like, why would you do any more work? Because you're gonna bring home the same anyway. And if that salary isn't covering bills already, it's like, what motivation do you have to continue to put that much effort when the pay you're bringing home remains the same and you might still be struggling?
That's true. And there, something to touch on that point is that when you told me about quiet quitting, I went through a comment section of this post that talked about it, and there's these people that were talking about, I don't know who they were, but there's one guy was saying how, like, if it would be more, quiet quitting is bad because, like, in his industry, he can do the job of 3 people that were just giving 100%. But if he gives 300%, it's easier for him to do the job rather than having 3 people in there, like, not doing it efficiently. Obviously, it depends on what industry, but I mean, he does have a point. Like, if you're doing something that's very, especially manual labor, technical, let's say you're building something, and you have 3 people only give 100%, that's 300%. But if you're able to give 300%, you would be more efficient at doing the job than
hiring 3 people.
No,
but that's the thing, is that, so there's a joke on TikTok too that people have been making. It's like taking comfort in knowing that, like, I'm not going to get fired because I'm doing the job of 3 people, and they would literally have to hire 3 people to replace me. Yeah. And, like, that would just be not great unless they find another person that's doing all of 300%. But then again, someone that's doing that might ask for more pay,
Yeah. This is crazy. I just remembered this. There's a guy talking about.
I know, you've already told this story.
I told the story?
Where he figured out how to do his job in like 8 minutes.
In 8 minutes every day, and he gets paid for 8 hours a day. He automated his job by him making his own custom.
And then he took
computer.
vacation. They're like, "How did you do this?"
How'd you do this? Yeah, it's like, because it was all manual, but he found a way to do it through computer and like.
I mean,
AI
they also do say
that.
like work smarter, not harder, man. It's like, I think at the end of the day, what matters is that your work is getting done. If it takes you, if you're able to figure out how to like automate those tasks, I mean, that's fucking great for you.
That's what I'm saying.
I think efficiency should be valued, and just because you can, like, I don't know, some people are like, I don't want to tell like my manager that I like get through my work because then they're going to give me more, and then what if it becomes too much, so it's like,
and then you're giving 300%.
Yeah, and then so like it's a balance of like what's the right amount of work for someone. And honestly, I think like if you're working a 40-hour week, there should be a little bit of time where you feel like you can breathe. I think it matters that obviously that the work gets done, but I also don't think it should like get done at the extent of like you feel like you can't breathe every day of your life, There's such a fine balance in that I think companies sometimes are also so focused on like, okay, you're done with this, do this. Like, and it's like, give someone a break to breathe, because burnout is a real thing. And I think that companies don't, like, we talk about it, it's more in like, the news and the media, and like employees are talking about it more, but it's a real thing. And recovering from burnout actually takes a very, very long time.
I mean, there's some people that unfortunately don't recover from burnout, and man, they end their life because they're that overwhelmed with what they do. I remember recently reading about a CFO. It was a CFO of a big company, and like they were struggling, and obviously him being the CFO, a lot of it was being taken out on him, and then they found him passed away on the street, and I'm like, damn, like that's what I'm saying is like even people that are higher up in the financial industry, like there's a lot that rides on them because they have to, they're overseeing all these budget stuff that, that feeds other people's families and people that work there. And if the company isn't doing good, then like, that's a lot of, even in the health industry, like, as a doctor, like there's a lot of burnout for doctors too, where they like.
Well, a lot of med students, one of my cousins posted about this earlier this week. A lot of med students going to med school, like, kill
Yeah.
themselves because it's stressful and they don't have the resources they need to, like, obviously we want our doctors, obviously to be well trained, and it's an important role in society and it requires a lot extensive study, but at the same time there again needs to be that balance where these people aren't getting to that place where it's I feel like the only solution is to not be here, and it's sad, and
I mean, it
it's
sucks that they have
something
to
that
think
like
that,
some people
you know.
have gone to, like whatever med school they go to, and like just been pushed to the side about it. Like they haven't like talked about how they haven't made changes to help med students deal with like the immense amount of pressure and struggle that it is. You're putting yourself into debt to have this not just fulfilling career because you're going to be saving people, but hopefully profitable career now that you're gonna have to pay all this debt, and getting to the finish line is so hard. So like it's just difficult, and it's a mental battle, and like there's not always resources, or like people feel like they can't speak up about it. And I think that's the same thing with companies, is some people feel like they can't speak up about like feeling a certain way because it will be seen as like vulnerable or weak, or not up to snuff with what the company needs. I know for me, a lot of times it felt like if I went to my manager, not now, but like I've felt this at like previous job, if I went to my manager and said, hey, I'm really struggling with this, they're gonna see me as not good enough, or that I can't do my job. I always thought I couldn't ask for help. That asking for help was a sign of weakness, and that I should just be able to do it and not ask any questions. But that's not the narrative that we need to be pushing. What we need to be pushing is a narrative of like open conversation and transparency of what's actually going on and how is this affecting your work. And not in the sense of like, obviously I know every company is a business and every business needs to make money to run, and at the end of the day, like we play a part in the business making money, so we need to have a certain level of efficiency, right? But I think there needs to be a level of understanding from companies that we're human and we're people, and we have struggles that are not always related to work, but also maybe we do have struggles related to work, and that's not something that should be shamed, but we should talk about it, and we should like have someone to lean on to help find solutions. And I think there also just needs to be greater intention behind it. I know sometimes, companies do have that where you have someone to talk to, but their motivation is like, again, money fueled, money based, business based, and it's less personal. It's less worried about you and more worried about the company. And I think that creates a disconnect,
Especially if you feel that way.
Yeah.
Especially if you feel that to the point where you feel like, oh, well, they're not going to really care because it's just more of like a.
If you just feel like you're a pawn in a game, it's there's a complete disconnect from like, your purpose there.
Yeah. And if you feel that, then yeah, that's where, that's where a lot of problems start in the workplace too, where you just feel like, oh, I'm just here, and then you just don't put that 300% anymore, and that could also be the cause.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, I just think that it's, there's, again, two sides of every coin. There's employees and employers, but I do think, like, companies should take on this role of figuring out, like, and root causing, like, what the problems are, and, like, it's just as a person needs to be self-aware, I think a company needs to be self-aware. If you don't know what's happening in your business, like, I think that speaks volumes on your company.
Yeah. Especially if you don't know what's going on with your business, or you are misled to believe that things are going a different way.
Yeah.
Then disaster happens.
Yeah, it's like when disaster strikes, you're like, how is this not brought to my attention? And you're having to put out these fires that probably could have been prevented in the first place. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think it's about open communication. I did read, when I was reading about quiet quitting, that it's not quiet quitting, that we should call it the Work-Life Balance Manifesto, because it really is about having balance in your life. I've talked about this before, but I do think that is so important is to find joy in other areas of your life and to have the time to do that, you know, to have the time to spend with family, because I've been in that, like, on the receiving half of like two parents who obviously did whatever they could to provide for me and my siblings, but it also resulted in like me not being able to see them a lot. Like, I didn't see my dad very much, and my mom was always working, so when it came to these things, it was, you know, taking away their time that they had to spend with us. And yeah, now they have a little bit more time, but we're all separated, and like now spending that time together is a lot difficult. So a lot more
difficult. It's
difficult.
okay.
I can't talk.
That's all right.
But yeah, it's about work-life balance, and I think, you know, it's not a narrative that's being pushed because it's not beneficial to companies for people to have balance, you know.
Yeah, they want people. I mean, not every company's that way. I mean,
No,
I
not every
wouldn't say,
company. But when I say like companies, I think about these big like enterprise companies, you know, that often have these issues. I think I found in my experience, like with smaller companies, or, you know, you don't have as much of this issue. Maybe you can, like, but that's just my experience. People might have. If you had a different experience, let me know. And, you know, yeah, I think about, a lot of times I think about these enterprise companies, because I've heard horror stories, you know, about those, and yeah, it's crazy.
It is.
But we're working on work-life balance. You know, I'm working on it every day. I talk to like my manager about it a lot because I'm someone who struggles with balance at all in my life. But I think it's so important to have that and to emphasize that, because at the end of the day, we only got one life, y'all. We only have one life to live, and I'm definitely don't want to look back and be like, oh, I spent all of my time working and doing nothing that I wanted to do, you know?
You want to
or be 60 and like, oh, I have time to do all the things I want to do, but now I'm too old, you know?
Yeah, no, I get that. I understand that, which is why, like, I love being able to, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, I love being able to create. Like, I love doing these things with you. I love doing things for other people when it comes to like creation of, whether it's content or assisting in the creation of content, whatever the case is. And being able to do this is like such a really cool thing for us. I love it. I love every second of it. So
I really love it too. And I think the whole point of this podcast obviously was to talk about quiet quitting today. But I think at the end of the day, you need to do, when it comes to your professional life, you need to do what's best for you. Obviously, if your job needs to be a means to an end, you know, do your job. Maybe not do anything that's not like in your job description, but honestly, it's about doing what's best for you and your life, and no one can tell you what that looks like because only you know.
yeah.
So focus on what's going to make you happy and what's going to make you in a better situation, whether that be a better financial situation, a better professional situation, a better work environment. It's all about, you know, you in that sense, because you're the one who has to deal with it at the end of the day. No one can tell you, oh, you should just put up with this, because they're not having to deal with it. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any last thoughts? Any final thoughts, Caesar?
I would honestly say that if you're in the position of giving 5,000% at your
5,000%
at your job, especially if you're in a career that you love doing, whether you're an engineer, you're in the hospitality industry, you're in the film, you know, content creation industry, that you're working for someone else, like let them know what's going on. You know, I would say being open and honest is a good step to figuring out a way to balance that out. Sometimes it doesn't work, but I would say at least try to give it, you know, at least try to like let people know what's going on. But
and if you do, like, that's, if you know you did everything you could, there's no blame on you.
There's no blame on you if you feel, you know, like you did the best that you could, and just things didn't end up panning out, and you're like, either you quietly quit and you're just giving 100%, or you just leave. You know, that happens too. You just leave. And yeah,
we're so glad if you listen to our podcast. If you follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, subscribe to us on YouTube. Again, this is something Caesar and I love to do. We're not professionals at all, experts in any of these matters. We're just speaking on our experience, our thoughts, our opinions, and we would love if you would share yours. We know that, like, there are other views out there, and I'm completely open to different perspectives. And, you know, I always love to see it from someone else's point of view. So comment on the video if you've had a different experience or what your thoughts are on quiet quitting, or let me know if you're quietly quitting and why. What drove you to that place? I'm just very interested. Caesar and I are looking into bringing more guests on soon. We have a couple things in the works when it comes to guests and getting some people who I feel can provide everyone with, you know, more expert knowledge and stuff that is relevant to growth in this podcast. So I'm super excited for what we have planned soon, and as it gets closer, I'll talk about it more. This has been Growing Together with me, Sunny Vasquez.
And me, Cesar Santos.
We hope to see you next week.
See you guys later.